Bomber Boys is a solitaire World War II game that's actually a free print and play, or PnP for short, or as I like to refer to them, a PnP. Excuse me. Bomber Boys will have you take on the role of a crew on a bomber as it flies over its target for a bombing run. You'll have to first work through the onslaught of enemy planes that arrive, some attacks from the ground, and negative events. The crew each have an ability that can be used, most of which can attack the enemy planes if they have appropriate line of sight to where the enemy is currently located. However, the enemy will attack you back, make no mistake, and as damage is allocated to the plane spaces, your crew that is situated in those spaces might take damage and be eliminated, preventing them from being used in future turns. You can download the files that are currently on Boardgame Geek, print them off, cut them to size, and you got everything you need to play it with the exception of some standard D6s and one D12, which if you're watching my channel and you don't have standard D6s and a D12 in your home, I'm just kidding, come on. The board here represents the bomber. Each numbered space on the plane corresponds to a crew member who are represented by these cards, of which there are a total of 10 crew members. So of course 10 spaces on the plane, and there are also 4 engine spaces, which are the 2 11s and the 2 12s here. When the bomber takes damage, usually from enemy attacks, you roll a d12 and place a minor damage token on the location in the corresponding space of the die roll. If there were to be another minor damage token placed in the same space there was already one, a major damage token from this track here would take its place, and the matching crew member would also be eliminated from play, so you couldn't use his abilities for the rest of the game. The track here that houses the major damage tokens I'll discuss in a bit more detail later because it has another in-game effect. In this game you lose if all 4 engines sustain major damage. You can also lose if the pilot and co-pilot spaces get major damage and they're eliminated. Another way to lose is if the 5 major damage tokens that are on the board are used up and allocated to the plane anywhere. Now the game comes with 5 target missions, each varying in difficulty, and they'll have you build a deck of cards to play through. These decks contain events, items, and enemies. At the end of the deck, you'll place the bombing run card. It's a dice allocation game. Once you reach the bombing run card by playing through the deck, you'll attempt to bomb it by rolling 5 dice and allocating those dice to appropriate spaces listed on the bombing run card. Each die listed on the card is the minimum required for a successful hit. For example, the 4 here, I could allocate a 4, 5 or 6 to, and so on for the other dice noted. Now you're unlikely to roll the 5 dice perfectly in the first attempt and fill all the spaces on the bombing run card. You'll want to allocate some after the first roll and re-roll dice that weren't able to be allocated in the first attempt. But how many re-rolls will you get, if any? Well, remember that track where the major damage tokens are taken from? It limits how many re-roll attempts you get when you've reached the bombing run card. So if I get to the bombing run card with 2 damage tokens here, meaning 3 major damage tokens are placed on my plane, which is not good, I'll only get 2 reroll attempts to better my bombing run results. And that's the basics of the winning conditions. You're trying to solve the end bombing run card. Let's delve into what you all came here for. Let's check out the gameplay. Each turn you'll draw a card from that bombing run deck. We'll start by bringing a basic enemy aircraft into play so you can see how combat is resolved. But as I mentioned, there are events and items in this deck as well. When an enemy aircraft is revealed, you'll either have to attack it or you can rally, which rally regenerates exhausted crew. I'll talk more about that soon. Regardless if you attack or rally, the enemy is going to attack you, so let's talk more about the enemy card's details. Most importantly, here is line of sight. It's where the enemy plane is located. You've got this one at 12 o'clock high, but others might be at 3 o'clock low, etc. To attack this plane, you'll need to have an active crew member with line of sight to that location, like the bombardier here. If I allocate a relative die to him after my attack roll, and again the die results printed here are the minimum, so it's actually a 2+ that's needed, I could then allocate an acceptable die to the bombardier, and in this case I would score 1 hit, which the hits are noted in the target icon here. And the bombardier would then become exhausted and rotated 90 degrees to represent that, so I couldn't use him in future turns until he rallies. But there's more crew with line of sight at the moment. If I allocate that same die, the 5, to my flight engineer, he'd score 1 hit. But as you can see, he has a much broader line of sight than the bombardier. He also has an ability that can remove a minor damage token from the plane, so I might not want to exhaust him just yet as he's much more versatile. However, I could exhaust my co-pilot to use one of his special abilities, which is to add 1 to a die and make this 5 into a 6, and I could allocate that 6 to the flight engineer and score 3 hits instead of the 1 previously. You know what, let's do that. I exhaust the co-pilot for his ability, the engineer for the attack, and allocate the 6, which will cause 3 damage to the aircraft. And this aircraft needs a total of 6 damage noted here in order to destroy it, so we've still got a way to go. In that example, I only rolled 1 attack die, and you're usually going to roll more than just 1, so it would have been more likely I'd be able to activate the flight engineer, the bombardier, and the co-pilot. But exactly how many attack dice are you going to get to use? Well, you better put some pants on for this one, because God knows I'm not wearing any, and it's kind of awkward if both of us aren't wearing pants and we're on the internet looking at each other like this. It's just awkward. See, it's awkward. Put some pants on. How many dice you roll in attacks is based on initiative. You always start with 5 dice available to attack with. This plane here has an initiative of 1, so it's actually very low. If I want to attack it first before it attacks me, I need to set aside 1 die to match its initiative value. So initiative for the player is again based on the dice, and it limits how many dice you'll get to attack with. So my initiative of 1 set aside, I'd actually attack with 4 dice left over, roll them and allocate them to various crew as best as possible. But the opposite would be true if I were to meet this plane's initiative, which is 4. I would only attack with 1 dice if I wanted to meet its initiative, because I'd have to put 4 aside to meet its initiative. So back to the example, I've now done my 3 damage with the flight engineer and the co-pilot's assistance, and the enemy plane will now attack back. He rolls 1 die and gets a 4. There are 2 dice noted on his card. You'll always allocate enemy die rolls to the worst possible dice shown here. The 2+ does 1 damage, the 5+ here would have done 2 damage. So with just the 4 rolled, it's just the 1 point of damage that I'm going to take. Next, we roll the d12 and allocate a minor damage token accordingly. Now the enemy planes stay there until you cause enough damage to remove it. It is possible that multiple enemy planes will be on the display that you'll have to be dealing with. In fact, mid-game that's quite likely to be the case. So allocation of attack dice to crew gets more interesting as multiple line of sights get utilised. Let's talk about exhausted crew. I now have the flight engineer and co-pilot exhausted, so they're momentarily unavailable. I want to rally to have them become active again. I can, as mentioned earlier, when an enemy card comes out, attack or rally. If I rally, all my crew that were exhausted become active again, but the enemy will get to attack me and I can't retaliate. The other way to rally is when an event is drawn from the deck. Events are all negative. They might limit which guns can fire this turn, add minor damage, a variety of negative things, but you can choose not to enact the event and just discard it. No problems, chuck it away, you're done. If only life were that simple, just chuck away the negative, wouldn't that be great? But discarding the event is one option. The other option is you can rally and take on the negative effects of the event. Sometimes rallying is far more important than a one-off negative event, so events can be a blessing and a curse depending on when they show up. Items are the other cards. These are good things. They give you some sort of special ability. For example, they might change die results, ready up to 2 exhausted crew, etc. When these come out, you can keep the item for future use or discard the item to rally. So let's go back to our bomber here and check out where we're at now. So we've now got exhausted crew that I can't utilise this turn. So this turn, if I attack again with one die just for demonstration purposes, same as before, I might use the ball turret. Actually, you know what? He hasn't got proper line of sight. He can see 12 o'clock, but only low, not high. But there's a way around that. I'll use one of my pilot's abilities to turn this whole plane upside down to give a line of sight to a crew member that wouldn't ordinarily have it. So I'll give that die to the ball turret for 2 hits. But I need one more to take it down. I might use my radio operator's special ability to call in escort fighters for an auto hit with all line of sight coverage. And that's the 3 hits needed, and that plane is down. What a load off, that plane's gone. But with my first exchange and this exchange, 5 of my 10 crew are now exhausted, so I'll need to rally ASAP, or the enemy are likely going to have free range. If an event is the next card, I'll likely want to take on the negative effect in order to rally. If it's an item, I'll likely discard it to rally. If an enemy plane is drawn, I'll likely sit out my turn to rally and accept the return fire that I won't be able to fire at. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen. For fuck's sake. There is more to the game. Obviously, I've only covered some of the crew's abilities, but this being a PnP, if you've gotten this far into the review, follow the link below to the Board Game Geek page, download the files, and you've got absolutely everything you'll need to have a crack at it yourself, bar the dice. In addition to what I've shown you here, there are also ground attacks in the game, which they'll attack you, but you can't attack back. However, you can try and evade them using certain crew's abilities in order to reduce some of the damage that might be taken from them. Focus tokens are available, which is a mechanism related to initiative. If you or the enemy exceed the opposition's initiative, there are bonuses that can be added to die rolls. So there is an additional consideration when choosing to take the initiative or not, other than just how many dice you get to roll in combat. If you're into print and plays, I think this is well worth the small amount of time and money to invest in this one. The artwork is beyond what some publishers come out with these days. Certainly, it makes it more appealing to someone like me who doesn't ordinarily play print and play games. I'm not opposed to them at all. I've just got a lot of unplayed published games to work through. Which, I mean, that's a really nice problem to have though. Now, the gameplay here is solid. It's quite laid back for a war-themed game, and it does maintain my engagement. Sometimes solo games, I don't really feel a rhythm playing out. You know, I don't feel engaged in the gameplay. And one thing I've learned about myself, and I'm curious if other people do this, when a solo game really captures my attention, I talk to myself. I'm willing to admit it. I talk through decisions out loud. I'll swear at die rolls. I sort of create a narrative for myself in that way. It might make me sound a bit mental, but kind of knew that about myself anyway. But that's how I know I'm having a good time, when I'm sort of talking myself through those decisions. And Bomber Boys is definitely a thumbs up in that regard. Shut your mouth. No, you shut your mouth. No! The way the decks are built for each scenario in this game means each time you play it, it'll be slightly different, as you'll have different events, items, and aircraft included in the run. Because when you build the bombing run deck, you select a number of each type of card from a pool of available event, item, and aircraft cards. Also, just the order in which the cards are drawn will offer some variation. It does only have 5 missions in the print and play version. I dare say it's a bit of a tease, a bloody good one if it is one. But if it goes to publication, depending on the price point, obviously, I'd like to see more scenarios included, and the scenarios, look, they do have a different feel. The Sea Strike mission, for example, is the only one that includes battleships. These are ground attacks, which I haven't covered battleships in this review. Sorry, there's a fly. But they're basically just giant pains in your ass from the ground. And the Berlin's Blitz mission is the only one with enemy aces, and I haven't covered them either, but they're basically just giant pains in your ass as well, just from the air. My point being with this is that the variations in the scenarios do make them have a different feel. Going back to the luck of the draw of the cards, in a couple of my games it's had a bit of a slow start, where my initial 4 draws were events and items. So with no enemies yet, events and items offer no real choices when you haven't had to exhaust anything yet. There's nothing to rally, so you'll just discard events and take items, no question about it. Again, it's the luck of the draw. Less than half of my games have started that way, and if they do start that way, you know there's going to be an absolute storm coming up, because you built the deck. You know how many enemies, events and items are in there, so you now know the enemies are about to come out in masses because you've gone through those several events and items already. But on those occasions, it does feel like a bit of a slow start sometimes. The rulebook is quite good. It's very well laid out, absolutely stunning. There is some information that could use more detail. I was playing the game and enjoying it, mind you. Then I discovered the designer had done a small playthrough video on Vimeo. You remember Vimeo? No? That's because there's no need to. It's like uploading a playthrough video to MySpace or Facebook. Anyway, after viewing that video, I realised I had missed a few minor details in the rules. So, in my opinion, the rulebook could be a bit clearer in some places, but it is certainly playable from the rule set provided. The details that I missed were relatively minor things. So, my overall experience, both before and after making those rules mistakes, it didn't detract from the overall experience at all. One of the most exciting things I think about this game is it has a lot of potential for expansion. With support, the skies would be the limit. You know what, I should have ended the whole review with that statement. But look, it is a neat game. It flows quite well. The opposition, the AI, is built into the solitaire experience for the player, so there's no real admin or decision making to make on its behalf, which I prefer not to have any of that decision making and that in my games. I like it just to be a pure solo experience, which this is. Obviously, with more scenarios and enemy units, the game would be expanded instantly, but what I'd really love to see here is a campaign method. To me, I instantly saw the potential for this. It has to have crossed the designer's mind, I'm sure. It has the individual scenarios. They're around 15 minutes long when you get the hang of it. So it is a short game, but imagine something as simple as a series of bombing runs laid out on a track that you'll have to play through. And as you progress to the next one, you can land, recruit new crew that were previously eliminated with slightly varied stats to the originals, make repairs to the plane. All this can be done based on victory points, because there are victory points awarded after a bombing run. If you haven't successfully bombed the target and completely eliminated it, there's still some victory points that are awarded. So a campaign-based thing would be so easy to add without adding much complexity or taking away from the individual scenarios if that's all you wanted to play. But you could quite literally incorporate the individual scenarios into a bigger campaign and turn it into a 2-hour experience with a great narrative. In summary, this is a lighter solo game with a World War II theme, which I do enjoy this style of game from time to time and more regularly at the moment because of time issues. But this one, though, is probably more accessible to the general solo gamer audience that doesn't consider themselves a wargamer yet. But subscribe. Don't worry, I'll do my best to convert you all over soon enough. Thanks for watching.